Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we preview St. Louis City SC against the Seattle Sounders. If you're listening to us on the podcast or on the radio, this might not sound any different, but if you're watching it on YouTube, you'll notice that this isn't our usual live stream. It's a special week as St. Louis hosts the Seattle Sounders. We're going for our fourth straight clean sheet, which would tie an MLS record. Excitement abounds as St. Louis is hot off their first win of the season, welcoming in the Seattle Sounders, who they have yet to defeat in 2+ years of MLS play. And to do so this week, we have an exciting show. Up next, I will be interviewing Tony Husband, the MLS Season Pass play-by-play announcer who will be calling the St. Louis City SC against Seattle Sounders game, along with his partner, Ross Smith. And then after that, I have a special interview with Sounder at Heart frontman Jeremiah Oshan, who I've talked to before and is a staple of not only this show, but Sounders coverage in general when it comes to Seattle Sounders. He's one of the go-to resources for Seattle. So it's an exciting show ahead as I'll have a conversation with Tony Husband looking at all facets of this matchup from both the Seattle and the St. Louis side, and then really dig into what we can expect from Seattle with Jeremiah Oshan. So I hope you enjoy those. Before we get to those, though, I have a little bit of information on St. Louis City to give you a heads up of what to expect player availability-wise. As we're recording this a little earlier in the week, we don't have that Friday press conference, as St. Louis City SC has shifted their press conference timing. So match day -1, meaning the day before for home games, and match day -2 still for away games. This week, the press conference will be on Friday. So if you're listening to this on the podcast Thursday or Friday morning, stay tuned to social media for what's upcoming. And if you're listening to us after that, you probably already know. But Joachim Nilsson returned to training this week for St. Louis City SC. Fantastic to see him continue his progression back to play. Kyle Hebert missed training with an illness, so we'll be monitoring that to see how he progresses later in the week for his availability. We know Timo Baumgartel had played last week, making his MLS debut. He continues to trend positively, looking for more minutes out of him. So I would say it's a little too early this week to expect Joachim Nilsson back, but it's exciting that he's returned to training, and we expect to see him not too far down the line. Everybody else, fairly healthy, good to go. No other injury concerns picked up from last week. So what you saw last week is what we carry forward into Seattle. Enjoy these next couple of interviews. Excited for you to hear them. It really enjoyed talking with Tony and Jeremiah. Hope to do it again soon. For now, thanks for joining us on Flyover Footy. Hope you enjoy these interviews, and we'll talk to you later. Welcome into Flyover Footy, and ahead of St. Louis City SC facing off against the Seattle Sounders, I am pleased to welcome on the show the play-by-play announcer for MLS Season Pass on Apple TV, Tony Husband. Tony, thank you so much for joining me here on Flyover Footy.
Matt, always a pleasure, and very much looking forward to being in St. Louis this weekend.
So Tony, along with his partner Ross Smith, will be calling the St. Louis City SC against the Seattle Sounders match live from St. Louis this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. on MLS Season Pass. But Tony's no stranger to St. Louis City SC. Tony, in fact, you and Ross called the inaugural match, City SC against Austin, back in February 23, and we've had a host of matches that you've called since. I think you guys were featured pretty heavily on the Onside documentary. Before we get into all of that, what memories have you had either from that Austin match or from previous St. Louis games you've called?
Well, it was an absolute delight to do the very first St. Louis match. I can still remember a lot about it because it was the very first evening of and day of Apple TV and MLS Season Pass and this brave new world we were all moving into. And, you know, we got a really good game, we felt, in week one. And I remember Austin, obviously, were coming off such a strong season the year before. Expectations were not terribly high for St. Louis going into that one. I think that's fair to say, although I had taken note of one or two things I'd read in the build-up to that game in which people had said things like, you know, actually, they're not looking too bad in preseason. But the MLS preseason is notoriously difficult to kind of get an idea on who's looking good and who's not. And then I really just remember how positive the night was for St. Louis. And you know, for me as a commentator, I was always aware of, you know, I might be broadcasting a piece of St. Louis history somewhere along the line here tonight. And I was thinking, you know, for example, the first goal, I really hope it's someone, you know, that just stands out in a crowd if it is going to be in a bundle of players or something. And I just remember the relief at being able to just see Tim Parker flying through the air and head that ball. And it's always a wonderful moment as a commentator when you know and you're absolutely certain who's making the connection with that ball. And I just always remember, you know, saying something like, Parker's there. And sure enough, it went into the net. And, you know, it was a great night, a great performance. And it just kind of got better and better as things went on and became almost surreal by the end, you know, by the time you got the third goal. the celebrations and things. So yeah, I kind of will always have a very fond place for St. Louis City SC in my heart, because to be there right at the beginning in such a historic moment and to be calling the game on that evening was very, very special.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar with you and your work, you've had a pretty illustrious broadcasting career. Prior to MLS Season Pass, you led the broadcast for Nashville SC. You've been a storied Premier League and FA Cup commentator, BBC veteran, including a run on possibly what I think we'd consider the most famous footballing show of all time, Match of the Day. And you've had other accolades and experiences, including being named, I believe, Royal Television Society Southern Sports Journalist of the Year in March 2020, if I have that right.
Very good. Yeah. Well, you've done your research, Matt. I'm impressed.
So before we get into your current role and this weekend's City Sounders match, I wonder if you could talk to our viewers and listeners about that journey. What's led you through broadcasting? What's driven you through the range of sports and experiences you've had so far?
Well, I mean, with every year that passes, it's become a longer story to tell. So I will try and give you the kind of key things. I suppose, first and foremost, family. I grew up in a journalism family in the UK, and my grandfather in particular was probably the biggest single inspiration for me, because he was a sports writer. And he was fortunate enough to work for one of the really big national newspapers in the UK, the Daily Telegraph. And for some 40 years almost, he was the boxing, football, and kind of Olympics correspondent. And I mean, his career consisted of, every World Cup from 1958 to 1986. He did the entire era of Muhammad Ali in boxing. He was at the Rumble in the Jungle. He was at the Ali Frazier in Madison Square Garden. Later on, he was at moments like Hagler Hearns in Vegas. And then he was also his final world heavyweight title fight before he retired. Some young guy called Mike Tyson appeared on the scene. Oh. And so the era that he saw in boxing, and of course, what he saw in soccer, he saw England win the World Cup in 1966. He went right through the whole era of obviously Pele, into Maradona. Anything that and then as I was born, obviously later on, and became aware like what my granddad did, I was just kind of in awe of all of that, and thought, well, I think I'd quite like to do that. So I kind of grew up thinking I'd like to be a writer, like just like him. That was it. Just a sports writer like him. And then I have my parents to thank as well, both journalists. My father is a newspaper man, and my mum's television, having started in newspapers as well. So I went to university, as was the way, by the time I kind of got to the age where you're starting to think about a career. And I went through college and got a degree. And then I was very fortunate. And I always tell this story to anybody who ever asks me for a bit of advice on kind of how you get anywhere. And never be shy to kind of volunteer, never be shy to put your face forward or your hand up. And I put my hand up, volunteer to do something at university. And the long and the short of it is that in volunteering to do something at university, I just impressed the local BBC station enough that they ultimately gave me a job. And then they gave me contract after contract, and then ultimately a full-time job. And so my journey into sports journalism kind of began there at the BBC, and I would stay there for a good part of 20 years because it's such a huge organization. You can have kind of 5-6 careers under the same umbrella. So I did everything really from controlling the radio station buttons, pushing the faders up and down while commentators were talking to me, to actually then becoming a commentator and a presenter and a reporter. I moved across into television, which is so often the way in a career. You kind of start in radio, move to television. And then, you've outlined some of the things I've been, fortunate enough to do, in football commentary and things. And Match of the Day is a iconic broadcast in the UK. I guess it's a bit like our Monday Night Football or something like that. It has that kind of resonance as a brand. And, it was a pleasure to be part of, that group of people who've been lucky enough to broadcast Premier League soccer and FA Cup soccer on Match of the Day. But through all of this, just to throw the last piece in, was a great love of American sport, watching American broadcasting, growing up, loving watching the NFL, and a kind of desire one day to maybe spend some time in the US. And so that ultimately was what led to the kind of quite big decision to kind of move on from the BBC and come out here.
Well, just prior to joining MLS Season Pass, you were the commentator for Nashville SC. But going from Nashville to a group like MLS Season Pass on Apple TV Plus, what's it like been covering one team into kind of trekking the country, covering an entire league across the United States?
Yeah, and with 30 teams now, I mean, it certainly keeps you on your toes as well. It's a big league to stay across. It's interesting because I know the tradition in American sports often is, kind of local broadcast, local names that become the faces and voices of teams. And I had a taste of that, obviously, with Nashville, and that was a wonderful experience. And still have so many great memories of doing Nashville SC games and with our Nashville SC broadcast crew as well. Many of whom still work when we do Nashville games now, and so you're still working with a lot of the same people. But I suppose in many ways, for me, it's more normal to do it the way we're doing it here. With you travel to a different game every week, because that's kind of what I'd spent most of my time doing football. In the UK, the radio commentators would always be the local ones, and I started out my career doing that with particularly Southampton in the Premier League, and they had a cup final, and we played in Europe and all sorts. But then ultimately, when you do television, you do tend to do a different game every week. So I kind of feel like with Season Pass, it's been back to kind of doing what I was used to doing before. You're researching on two new teams every week. But as I say, it's good. This part of the year, though, Matt, I will say, and I'm sure you find this as well. This is where the really hard hours come in, because you're new into the season. You haven't seen the teams play as much. There are new players scattered across rosters, and you're trying to get as much information as you can. As the season goes on, it gets a little bit easier as you start seeing teams for a second or third time, and of course, you're more familiar with any of the new players that have come in over the winter.
And so this preparation, it's kind of you're out off one weekend and then you immediately have to start covering or start researching the next weekend. And can you talk through what that preparation is like, as well as what it's like broadcasting with Ross? Because you guys have been together for now going into your second season.
Yeah, I mean, we're into our third season. So, I actually was adding it up the other day. I think Ross and I, we're not far off a century of games together. So, for that, I'm very sympathetic to him that he's had to nearly endure 100 games with me in a commentary box. But then again, he's been great fun. And, we really get along well. And, you learn the traits that each other have. And, we fundamentally, I think, we really enjoy just working together and almost having a chat as we're watching a game. And we want it to feel relaxed, informal, but also informative. And I think he's one of the best at that when it comes to analyzing what you're seeing and breaking it down for the viewer. So he's got a super talent there. But in terms of prep for a game, I suppose in some ways it almost starts actually. If you're doing, for example, like we're doing an 8:30 Eastern time game this weekend in St. Louis, so a whole group of games will have started, and one or two will have been played in the afternoon as well. And sometimes, if I know the team I'm doing next week is actually, is already underway and playing in a 7:30 Eastern window, I might even be having a quick look at their formation and who's playing for them, just to have a quick glance. So I'm almost starting to think 7 days ahead. It's just a cursory glance, really, of the MLS app to see who's playing. All right, he's playing, he didn't play, whatever. Okay, right. Well, forget about that for the moment. Now I need to focus on the game I'm doing. So that started a week out. And then, I will then basically work through the week, try and watch as much as possible. There's no substitute for that, really. You can sit and bury yourself in numbers, and there is a lot of number crunching to be done. But ultimately, you want to watch these teams play and get used to, what their traits are. And actually, the Sunday Night Soccer has been brilliant for me from that point of view, because, I was able to sit and watch St. Louis live last Sunday night on Sunday Night Soccer, rather than kind of waiting till maybe Monday morning and watching a Saturday night game back that I knew what had happened in. And you lose a little bit of the edge when you're having to do that, but that's all part of the prep. And then it just goes through the week. And I will say as well, doing things like this is great, because I'm talking to you. I hope I'm going to learn lots from you during this conversations we talk about St. Louis, because there's no substitute for the people on the ground and the information you're part of. You have a good feel of the pulse of the fans and what people are talking about, what matters. And I think that's really important for us, because you don't want to hear me just saying this Saturday night, Olaf Melberg, in his first season in MLS as a head coach. I think probably you've heard that by now. We need to be giving you more And so, getting yourself really in with the local media and understanding what they're talking about is very important.
Well, so it shows you how quick time flies. You've been doing this. You're one of the OG MLS season pass announcers from the very beginning, and we're in our third year as well. So you've kind of grown alongside St. Louis City SC in this regard. But yeah, let's pivot into this weekend's match against, and the one you're going to be calling, Seattle Sounders, St. Louis City SC. What do you make of these two teams overall coming into this match? What are some storylines that you and Ross are going to be following? And I guess what have you thought of the forms of both these teams coming into this?
Well, I think everything for St. Louis kind of pivots really on the fact of a great result in LA last weekend. I actually remember, you scoring 3 goals in LA last year in a real thriller at the Galaxy at 3-3 with the Nielsen overhead kick. But this time, this Sunday night was a fantastic performance. Credit to Roman Berkey for his form. Again, proved why, for me, he's the best goalkeeper in the league, and by some distance as well, ahead of probably Blake and Kalina. Kalina got the honours last year because Berkey had a more difficult year and obviously what was ultimately a struggling team for most of the year. But a terrific result with that backbone of Berkey. Henry Kessler seems to be coming into his own a bit more after a slightly stuttering start perhaps last year after arriving midway through the year and coming again from a team that had been really struggling in New England. And then I looked at the roster. I think there are 7 Germans on this roster now. It's a heavily European-based kind of roster. And, Teuchert and Hartl have impressed me since they arrived, and, they continue to do so. Klauss, with him, it's about keeping him fit and getting him playing. I think I saw that this weekend would be, if he plays, his 50th MLS appearance, and he's been here since day one. So you can see how much soccer he hasn't played. And I've always felt St. Louis are better when Klauss is fit and around. But then Betcher has come in and proved that he can score goals at this level as well. So, I'm impressed with St. Louis off the back of LA. If the result had gone differently, I suppose we might have been sitting here going, well, 2 scoreless draws. I think the scoreless draw at San Diego was absolutely fine. I've heard some people kind of speculating that maybe they could have done a bit more, been a bit more front foot. And my take on that was, look, it was San Diego's night. Don't fall into the trap of getting caught up in that. Take a point and go home. And then the Colorado game, Colorado might well turn out to be a pretty good side in the Western Conference again this year. Maybe probably better than last year. So not a bad point first game. So from a St. Louis point of view, lots of optimism going into the weekend. For Seattle, well, I watched the CONCACAF Champions Cup game last night, and what happened in that may have a big impact on how we see this game now on Saturday. It doesn't sound good on Arriola. It didn't sound good hearing him on the side of the field in Mexico City there with what looked like a very uncomfortable injury. I hope he's okay. And then Jordan Morris going down injured as well, a week after becoming Seattle's record goal scorer. Those 2 players were a big reason, along with also Jesus Ferreira and Pedro de la Vega as well. Why I feel Seattle will be right up there this year among the contenders for MLS Cup. Now, if they've lost Morris and Arriola for any length of time, then we may be forced into an earlier reassessment. I mean, Morris didn't look too bad, but it could be a hamstring. Arriola looks like it could be longer. We'll wait and see what the injury report has to say, but that's going to hit them. And we're still kind of waiting on De La Vega as well. So I think what kind of team we see from Seattle this weekend is going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, it makes for a really tough timing to face St. Louis, I think, for Seattle. And it's almost unfortunate as they're coming off of this long stretch of matches. And, I had prepped a series of questions to ask you relating to Jordan Morris, but, it's almost out the window for that at this point. So instead, I'm kind of curious what you've seen so far from Seattle in navigating this fixture congestion. 7 matches in 21 days, 8 in 25 days. This will be their 8th match in 25 days. So how has Brian Schmetzer done in navigating all this fixture congestion, and what consistency have you seen from this roster so far early in the season?
Well, inevitably, I suppose, you can see in the results, the score lines, they go from a 5-2 to a 4-1 defeat. There's inconsistency there. And there goes the old challenge that MLS clubs face when they play CONCACAF Champions Cup. They're playing knockout games very early in their season. They haven't really found their feet. I mean, some of these rounds are taking place before they've even played a regular season game. MLS teams, do come into that competition with a significant disadvantage every year. And also the Mexican teams are working by different financial rules as well in terms of how they can accrue the players in their squad. So Seattle yet again appear to be another team. Cincinnati, much the same, who have gone out against Tigres. Really tough tie to be playing that so early in the year. But the inconsistency is not a surprise to me. We saw Brian Schmetzer play a pretty rotated team against LA last week, and they got a great result. He brought in some of the big guns later on, and they really added to the goal tally. Looks like now we're looking at players like Danny Lever, Danny Musovsky, who are going to be kind of key players for them potentially in the weeks to come. And Jesus Ferreira as well. His goal scoring's just dried up the last year or two. And he needs to, if he's going to be potentially pushed into a more central role as well, he's going to need to try and deliver on the goal scoring front because they may well need him to in these weeks to come. So I'm not surprised about kind of where they are. That they've won, they've lost, they've drawn. That is typical beginning of the season. But the depth of their roster is going to be challenged a little bit more and earlier than we thought.
And this is, in a lot of regards, a typical Sounders team from my perspective because they're a possession-based team. I know they've changed their shape a little bit over the past year or two, but in their two losses against RSL and against the Cruz Azul team in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, they had less than 50% possession in those compared to when they've been able to win this year. They're still a team that likes to control the ball. So when you look at this Sounders team, are they weak when they're not controlling the ball, or how can you defeat this Sounders team when they're allowed to have possession?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I wouldn't take too much from what we're seeing from them so far because they're playing in multiple competitions or have been. They look like they're coming out of a kind of 3-4-3, if you want to look at it like that. That drops into at times. I was watching them in this game last night. At times they're dropping almost into a 5-4-1. It's with the ball. It's without the ball. I think for St. Louis, they probably, and I would sense out of Melbourne, won't be too overly concerned with how they're going to approach the way St. Louis, way Seattle are taking the game. I think it'll be more about what St. Louis do on the night. I think you can see in the way Seattle were building out. It was a little slow for me, perhaps, against Cruz Azul. Actually, when they went a bit more direct at times, with Fry picking out a pass from long distance, they've got some dangerous players still. I like Rothrock. I think he's made a good impression. So they've still got some weapons that can cause some problems. How they do that, whether they sit in a bit and look to play in transition on the counterattack, we'll have to wait and see. Probably, though, at this stage, it's difficult to say how, and it will be hugely influenced, I would think, by the personnel that Brian Schmetzer deploys.
All right, let's switch over to St. Louis. Let's dive into what our listeners and viewers really want to hear is your takes on St. Louis that will inform, no doubt, your commentary this weekend. So let's start by what you said, that basic intro of what have you made of this Olaf Mellberg team through 3 games so far?
Well, I think Mellberg was a central defender who I watched many times play for Aston Villa back in his Premier League days. I would think he will be delighted by the fact that he has 3 clean sheets on the board straight away. I mean, that would be a solid back line, I'm sure, is something that he greatly appreciates. So from that point of view, so far so good, and still some bodies to kind of come in. I mean, we haven't really seen Timo Baumgartel other than for a couple of minutes as a substitute. There's some parts there. Nielsen again battling injuries. As he has been for much of his time in St. Louis. There are options to come into that back line. Looks like a 3 at the moment with wing backs. And then, the midfield, I've always been a fan of Leuven. I think he's a super player, and he's done some good things already for St. Louis in, what's been broadly a very good couple of years for him. Disrupted season off the field last year. But a lot, again, depends on, are your strikers firing? And I come back to that point I made about João Klauss. If you can have him fit, I like Klauss in that team. And he probably just hasn't been able to play a run of consistent games enough over the last 3 seasons. So let's hope that he is going to be fit for an extended run, because I always think of Klauss as he scores in clusters. It's the Klauss cluster goals. He gets them in groups. And I'm sure he'll be looking to try and get off the mark this weekend at home.
Yeah, Klauss is definitely a player that I want your opinion on a little more in depth. He's become kind of a polarizing figure in the St. Louis fan base, not just because of his lack of goal scoring, but there is a large, growing, I would say, sector of the fan base that is recognizing his off the ball work. On one hand, you have he was our first and still one of our designated players. He's the team's number 9 striker who hasn't scored a goal since May 11th, 2024, where he had a brace against the Chicago Fire, so scoring in buckets. But on the other hand, there's a more vocal group in the fan base who is acknowledging and really relishing the fact that his characteristics and strengths lend themselves well to link-up play, building from the midfield into the attacking third, and really leveraging that direct approach from the middle third to goal. Now he has friends around him who are higher quality in Marcel Hartl, Cedric Toyshirt, and you mentioned Simon Betcher earlier. The term false nine has been making its way through the fan base. So how would you describe Klauss's work as you've seen him over the past couple of years? I don't know that his role has necessarily changed. It might have evolved a little more, but what do you see from Klauss and his role in making St. Louis a better team?
I think you've just brought up the link-up play. There's so many other things he can be doing off the ball that aren't always necessarily picked up. The bottom line is he is a striker and he's a target kind of striker. So those stats don't stand well for him when it comes to goals. I think also, though, I would point to what I said already about fitness. I think his fitness has struggled at times during the last couple of years, and it's amazing the effect that can have on a player if he can't consistently turn it out. And even if he's playing potentially through the pain and he's not 100% fit. And I think I've seen several games where it's been abundantly clear he's not 100% fit over the last couple of years. So that's a factor as well. We can't give him an easy ride because ultimately he's there to score goals. I'm not a huge fan of kind of false nines, unless they're really, really good. But he can do some very, very good things. And the link-up play, for a start, is one of them. And you can see how the likes of Hartl and Toyshirt have profited from that since they've been in St. Louis as well. But ultimately, he's there to score goals. So Betcher coming off the bench and getting a goal very quickly on Sunday night is pressure. And we'll have to wait and see which way Olaf Melberg goes. But certainly, I think we still have some more to see from Klauss. But the question mark will be, can he get a run of games, get fit, and then does he produce another kind of little sequence where it's a cluster of goals?
St. Louis fans are always interested in comparing our players to other teams, to the best in the league. So when you see that attacking core and individually of Klauss, but more specifically, Marcel Hartl and Cedric Toyshirt, I think a lot of St. Louis fans are looking for where we can stack those players up in the league against some of the other better attacking midfielders and strikers in Toyshirt and the midfielder in Hartl. How do you see them compared to other top tier players that each team has in the league?
I think they're up there among some of the best players doing those particular jobs in the league right now. I mean, I think you always have to judge on length of time that you're consistently producing the goods. I don't like to judge things on too fewer games on a small sample, if you like. But they are good assets to this St. Louis team without a doubt right now. You look at a German in somewhere like in Nashville, in Hani Mukhtar, who is yet to get off the mark 3 games into the season. And yet he was an MVP two years ago. So, they stack up well and have been well recruited by Lutz van der Scheel, who, has got that eye on the radar of European soccer in particular and German football, which he knows so well. So, no, I think Toyshirt and Hartl were kind of game-changing arrivals last year that ultimately weren't there. There was so much turnover, so many other things going on. It wasn't going to be enough to push St. Louis up across the line and into the playoffs last year. But there's certainly players that you can build a team round this year and hope to have a much more successful season round.
Roman Berkey earlier this year noted in, I think it was after the Colorado match, that some of the shots, and especially after San Diego, some of the shots that they had taken would have been goals in previous years. So he was, commentating on the defense, the back line. As you've seen these first 3 games, both defensively in the clean sheets, but also what they've been able to produce in the attack, does this seem like a different City team? Because Lutz van der Scheel has referred to this as City 2.0. Are you seeing that level of evolution in these first 3 games compared to a Bradley Carnell led City team, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been so much change. Yeah, I don't think this looks particularly, even just in the names on the team sheet, this is not really a Bradley Carnell team anymore. There's not that many players left now when you look at the starting 11 that were in Austin on that opening night that we were talking about at the start. So no, we are seeing an evolution. I think in keeping that clean sheet at LA, there was a lot of throwing bodies on the line and a lot of commitment and wholeheartedness, which I think you saw under to Bradley as well, certainly during the best times. But I think we need to see more of what Olaf Melberg is going to bring, to the party. I mean, it's still early for him. He'll still be finding his way about this league as well. Until the real games start, I think he will now be getting a measure of what kind of opposition you can be coming up against. I think one of the great things about MLS people talk about is every week you can be coming up against a completely different style. You can find yourself up against a very high pressing kind of energy drink football in terms of a Red Bull style high press. And then you find another week you're taking on a team who likes to sit back, who likes to dominate possession. So there are so many different teams that do different ways in this league. And I think right now, Melbourne will probably be finding out about that and learning a lot with every week that goes by. But I think the early signs, the omens are good for St. Louis from what we're seeing. I mean, if you're a team that's kept 3 clean sheets in 3 straight games, that's a very positive way to start the season. Follow that up with 3 points against Seattle, and that's an excellent start to the season for me.
What do you think St. Louis needs to do to, I think, tie the record for most clean sheets to start a season? And is what they've shown in their defensive work the first 3 games, that could be enough for a Seattle team that, like we said earlier, they do like to hold on to the ball. They will break you down. And St. Louis, although they've never beaten Seattle yet, they've also never thrown this 5-man backline, 3 center backs at Seattle. So do you think this is a look that matches up well against the Sounders?
Could well do, couldn't it? I don't see any reason why it couldn't. I mean, we talk about the Sounders pieces that might not be involved this Saturday night. That in itself gives them a different look, probably. We're probably looking at Mazowski starting up front for them. Maybe they do something with Ferreira. Or do they keep him out wide, or do they bring him through the center? Nevertheless, they're dangerous players who know where the back of the net is. So it's still a tough challenge for the St. Louis group, but it's a challenge I think they can rise to at home. Of the confidence now, the more you play and the more you become a unit, with the experience of Berkey behind them as well. And if it's going to continue to be the back 5, no reason why it shouldn't be, then they're going to grow with every week. I talked earlier about how Kessler just seems far more at home at the start of this season than I felt he looked just on his arrival last year. Hebert has been, a wonderful part of this club, really, since being a surprise package a couple of years ago. So, some good parts and some bodies to come in. And that's the other thing, is pressure also for people to keep their places. Baumgartel's come in, he would expect to be getting in and starting. Nielsen's a quality player. If fit, he would want to be starting. So that is an edge that will keep people on their toes. And competition always, you would like to think, brings out the best in teams.
One of the last questions I have for you, I'm curious your take on the wingback system in general. It's new, it's flashy, exciting for St. Louis. The fan base has seen a lot to like about it at first, especially defensively in the volume of defenders in the defensive third. We've slowly seen the progression in the attack and kind of the link-up play get better and better as the new season has worn on. But in general, is this league a league that is growing more towards teams utilizing wingbacks? And is this, in general, a recipe for success?
Well, I seem to have been through so many eras that I remember back in the 90s when the kind of 3-back line and wing backs suddenly started to protrude its way into the English Football League. A lot of teams started doing it. Then they went away from it. We went back to very much having 4-man back lines. And, the wing back seems to be quite a favorable option again at the moment. My take on it, just for what it's worth, and what do I know really when we dig too deep into the tactics, but I think it's a good tool to have when you have the right players to fit that routine and that actual formation. So if you've got players it requires a lot of getting up and down from your wing backs, but it also offers you opportunities with your 3. I've always been a great fan, as much as I said, I quite like seeing a 4-man back line. But if you can have that central man in the 3 stepping up or stepping back, sometimes he plays in what we traditionally would call the sweeper role, or indeed stepping up and adding an extra body into midfield. And then the 2 can come around and cover a little bit. It gives you options. You can be flexible. I think we talk about formations a lot in soccer these days, but we're now more often actually talking about a with the ball formation and a without the ball formation. We go back to Seattle when they were without the ball at Cruz Azul, they were effectively a 5-4-1. Now that sounds ultra defensive, but when they were pushing forward, they're into a 3-4-3. So the formations are very, very fluid these days. It looks like St. Louis have landed on something that right now works. But it's amazing, how I talk to coaches quite often who, when they are playing a 3-man backline, 5-man backline, whichever way you want to look at it, they'll often say, well, what I really want to do is play a 4, but I just don't feel I've got the players for it. So it's all about the pieces and whether they fit right. And certainly the early indication would be that, this is a system that works for St. Louis right now.
But Tony, we love talking stats, formations, and everything on this show, and that might have been my favorite thing that you've had to say, because from my perspective, what I've seen from Henry Kessler is he's a central center back that likes to drop deeper. He likes to clean up the mess behind the left and right center backs who step forward to help progress the ball. The notion of the central center back stepping forward is something I think a lot of fans might have piqued their interest a little bit in that, because of the struggles that our midfield has had at times in connecting the ball and in just changes, especially against the Galaxy, where you had to make tactical subs in the second half that changed the formation into a 5-4-1 because the midfield was being overrun at times. Those are some interesting choices that Olaf Melberg has made. And as our time's running short, Tony, I have one last question. I am not going to put you on the spot to give a score prediction like we usually do with our guests, but I am curious, the one thing that you could point to for each team that they need to do in order to win this match.
Well, I'm going to keep it very simple for St. Louis. At home, goals are required. I'm sure the fans want to see goals this weekend after goals on the road. So it's going to be straightforward for St. Louis. Take those chances when they come along. I think this could be a good time to play Seattle. So when the chances come, be ruthless. That would be my advice to St. Louis at home, because this is a game where a ruthless finish and taking the game by the scruff of the neck against a Seattle group who've had a long week of travel, a difficult week. They've lost pieces. These are the kind of games you can really take the ascendancy if you grab it early. For Seattle, it's going to be about showing what they can do through adversity, proving to themselves how good they can be. How much of a contender can they be without perhaps some of their best pieces? This is still a very, very good group, a very experienced group. They have been in this kind of situation. They'll walk into Energizer Park and they won't be overawed by what they see. The longer the game stays 0-0, I think the more they will fancy they can try and grab something, possibly from a set piece type situation as it goes on. So for St. Louis, be ruthless, try to score early. For Seattle, be solid, and maybe you grab a late goal.
All right. Well, that'll do it for our look ahead to this weekend's match between the Seattle Sounders and our St. Louis City SC. Tony Husband, play-by-play announcer for MLS Season Pass on Apple TV. Thank you again so much for joining us on Flyover Footy. If folks want to follow you beyond the booth, where can they find you on social media or otherwise?
On X at Tony Husband. So I'm there, and we'll still post where we are, what we're doing, what we're seeing, and what we're enjoying in the world of football. I would appreciate anybody wanting to follow the journey. We're doing a bit more social media on the road as well this year, Ross and I. So you get a bit more behind the scenes. So we'd love to see people interact with that.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. Perfect. Tony, we'll look forward to hearing you on the call with Ross Smith this weekend. Thank you again for your time on Flyover Footy. And thanks everyone for listening to this interview. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for joining us, and have a great weekend of soccer. All right, Tony.
Cool.
Appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around later too. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem at all. No, it's good fun.